Skulduggery Pleasant, Book 1, Chapter 12, Vampires. Skulduggery clicked his fingers and candles flared up all around the chamber. There were books piled on books and artifacts and statues and paintings and wood carvings, and there was even a suit of armor to one side. This all has to do with the scepter? Stephanie asked in a whisper. It has to do with all the ancients, Skulduggery said. So I'm sure there must be something about the scepter in all this. I honestly don't expect there to be this much. You don't have to whisper, by the way. There are vampires above us. These chambers are sealed. I broke the locking seal, but the sound seal is still in place. Did you know locking seals have to be dismantled every single time you want to go through and then corrupted again once you leave? I don't see what's wrong with a good old-fashioned key. That would certainly keep someone like me out. Well, until I knock the door down. What's a sound seal? Oh, even if they were standing outside the door and you were shouting at the top of your voice, they wouldn't hear you. Ah, okay then. They started searching. Some of the books were about the legends of the ancients, some took a more practical and analytical viewpoint, and some were written in languages Stephanie didn't recognize. A few of the books held nothing but blank pages, yet Skulduggery seemed able to read them, although he said they contained nothing of immediate interest. She started reading through a collection of paintings, stacked and framed against the wall. A lot of them showed people holding the scepter aloft and looking heroic. The paintings fell, and she started to push them back up. She looked at the painting in front of her, recognizing it from the book she had seen in Skulduggery's car. A man shutting his eyes from a glowing scepter as he reached for it. This was the full painting, not the truncated little rectangle on a page, and Skulduggery glanced over at her as she put the pictures back the way they had found them. She approached the suit of armor, noting the shield and bear etched into the breastplate. Family crest? She asked. Sorry? Oh, yes. We don't have many family names that we can keep, so crests serve as our only link to our ancestors. Do you have a crest? He hesitated. I used to. I don't anymore. Why not? I abandoned it, actually. Why? You ask an awful lot of questions. When I grow up, I want to be a detective just like you. He looked over and saw her grinning. He laughed. I suppose you do share my penchant for raising Cain. Raising what now? It's an old expression. It means to make trouble. Why can't you just say making trouble? Why do you always have to use words that I don't know? You should read more. I read enough. I should get out more. He held a small box up to the light, turning it over in his hands and examining it from every angle. What's that? She asked. It's a puzzle box. Can't you play with it some other time? The purpose of a puzzle box is its whole raison d'etre is to be solved. What kind of raison? Raison d'etre. It's French for reason to be. There you go again. Why can't you just say reason to be? Why do you have to complicate things? My point is, leaving a puzzle box unsolved is like leaving a song unsung. It may as well cease to exist. There's a crossword in the paper that my dad gets every single day. He starts it, makes up nonsensical words to fill in the blank ones, and he doesn't know, and abandons the puzzle. I'll give you every paper we have lying around the house if you put that thing down and get back to searching. I've given up searching. She stared at him. And they say my generation has a short attention span. The painting that you were looking at. Don't say anything strange about it. There were a lot of paintings. The man reaching for the scepter. What about it? Did you notice anything unusual about it? She went over to the wall again and moved the frames one by one until she came to the painting she was talking about. Okay, unusual like how? Describe it to me. She moved the others out of the way so she could take a better look. There's the man. He's reaching for the scepter. It's glowing, and that's it. Nothing strange about him? No, not really, she frowned. Well, the scepter's really bright, and he's got one hand shielding his eyes, but both eyes are wide open. So if it's really that bright, you kind of expect him to be squinting at least, even if it is just a picture. Anything else strike you as a little off? She scanned the painting. The shadows. What about them? He's got two of them. So, the scepter is magical after all. It could be casting two shadows as easily as one, for whatever bizarre magical reason. But the scepter isn't casting these shadows. The angles are wrong. So what could cause that? Two different light sources. And what is the primary source of light? The sun. If it is the sun, what time of day would it be? Well, the shadow at his feet would make it noon, when the sun is directly overhead. But the shadow behind him would make it either morning or evening. Which one? How should I know? It's behind him, so it might be morning. So what you're looking at is a painting of a man reaching for a scepter, seeing everything at a time when it is both the past and the present. I suppose so. What does that have to do with the puzzle box? Who painted it? She peered at the bottom corner. There's no name, just a crest, a leopard and crossed swords. Skulduggery raised the puzzle box for her to see. What was carved into his base? a leopard, and crossed swords. Right. Guessing games are over. The painting tells us that the painter or the painter's family can offer us a glimpse into the past, and that is what we in the profession call a clue. A clue is part of a mystery. A mystery is a puzzle. I hold in my hands a puzzle box. Skulduggery's fingers played over the surface of the box, and Stephanie saw his head tilt. He pressed two hands on opposite sides, making subtle rotations until something clicked. There was a noise, like the whirring of a motorized part, and the top of the box opened to reveal a blue gemstone. Ah! Stephanie peered closer. The gem was a little bigger than a golf ball. What? What is it? It's an echo stone. Very rare, generally used by people who are dying. They sleep with the stone for 3 nights, and in doing so, they imprint it with their memories and personality. It was given to loved ones to help comfort them through their grief or to answer any lingering questions they might have. Things like that. How did it work? I am not entirely sure. I've never seen one up close. He pressed a fingertip to the stone and it immediately started to glow. His head tilted again and he sounded very pleased with himself. Well, you look at that. I'm such a genius. You just touched it. Still a genius, Stephanie, she sighed. A moment slipped by, and then an old man faded out from nothing before them. Stephanie stepped back. Don't be alarmed, the old man said, smiling, and he was wearing a robe and had kind eyes. I'm not going to hurt you, young lady. I'm here to answer questions and provide you with whatever information you can assist in your... His voice trailed off. He was looking at Skulduggery. My, oh my, you're a skeleton. I am. As I live and breathe, figuratively speaking. Of course, I neither live nor breathe. But a skeleton? A walking, talking skeleton at that. I am very impressive, Skulduggery said. Who are you? My name is Ocean, and I am here to answer any questions you might have. Well, that's good news, because we're looking for a few answers. How did you manage that, then? I'm sorry? Becoming a skeleton? That's a new one on me. Well, it's a long story. Ocean waved his hand. Better not tell me. This stone will only work for a short time before it needs to be charged, and I don't have a lot of time to give you the answers you seek. Yes, then we better start. Yes, we would better. Was it painful, though, losing your flesh? I don't mean to be rude, Ocean, but aren't you supposed to be the one answering the questions, not asking them? Ocean laughed. I admit I am a little bit too curious for my own good. On the other hand, I do have an in-depth knowledge of the stories of the ancients, so in many ways I am the ideal candidate. Better suited to this than my colleagues, believe me. Before we get started, can I ask what century this is? The 21st. 21st? He repeated, laughing with delight. Oh my, so this is what the future looks like, eh? Kind of gloomy and cluttered. I always thought it'd be brighter, you know? So what's been happening in the world? You want us to tell you everything you missed? Well, not everything. Just the high points. What language am I speaking, by the way? Stephanie frowned. English? English! Ha! Marvelous. I've never spoken English before. How does it sound? Fine, I suppose. Does the stone translate what you're saying? Yes, it does. I could have used something like this on my travels. I'll tell you that much. It would have really impressed the ladies. He started to truckle and then stopped. Not that I ever traveled far, or at all. I don't trust boats, you see. If nature had intended us to travel across water, we would have been provided with fins. Can we ask you questions? Again, I don't want to be rude, but if the stone runs out of power before we learn what we need... The old man clapped his hands and rubbed them together. Of course, my boy. Say no more. Ask me your first question. You're an expert on the ancients. Yes, I am. I am the one charged with the task of documenting their existence. It's a great honor, even if it does leave me with precious little time to travel. Not that I would, even if I could, but it'd be nice to have options, you know? Yes. Anyway, we need to know about the scepter. We need to know its power. Osa nodded. The scepter of the ancients was created to destroy, and destroy it does. Therefore, there's nothing that won't crumble to dust under its glare. Is there any kind of defense against it? No shield, no spell, no barrier. It cannot be stopped, and it cannot be destroyed. What about its power source? Stephanie asked. A single crystal, a black crystal, embedded in its hilt, capable of channeling the energies that's poured into it. And can the crystal be destroyed? I've thought about this, actually. I know more about the scepter than anyone else since the time of the ancients. Certainly more than my colleagues, and while there is no record of weakness, we have translations of texts that suggest the crystal can be destroyed from within. How? Stephanie asked. I don't really know. Who created the scepter? Skulduggery asked. Ocean puffed out his chest. The scepter was created by the ancients as a weapon to be used against their gods. For 1 year, they toiled out of sight and in darkness so that the gods could not see what they were creating. His chest deflated and he smiled. That's a direct quote from one of the first texts we found. I found it, actually. The others were so jealous. That's probably why they didn't want me to be the one to answer your questions, Stephanie frowned. You're not supposed to be here. We had a vote. I voted for me. No one else did. They're just jealous. They said I'd waste time, talk too much, so I stole the stone and went away for a few days to imprint it with my consciousness. They can't imprint anything over it, you see, and now here I am. He beamed, and then his whole body faded and suddenly became transparent, and his beaming smile vanished. Ah! Time seems to be running out. If you have any more questions, who created the crystal? Skulduggery asked quickly. Well, if you allow me to quote from the text that I discovered, the Faceless Ones created the crystal, and the crystal sang to the Faceless Ones when an enemy neared, but when the engines approached, the crystal was silent and did not sing to the Faceless Ones, and the Faceless Ones did not know it was taken. So the security system has a blind spot. It looks that way, Osen said, nodding. His image grew even fainter, and he held up a hand and gazed through it. This is sort of unnerving. The scepter has returned, Skulduggery said. Osen looked up. What? It was uncovered recently and then hidden again. We need to know how to find it. Oh my. If the rocks or the person takes possession of the scepter, it'd be bad, we know. Osen, how do we find it? The old man vanished for a moment, then flickered back into sight. I don't know, dear boy. Who hid it? My uncle, Stephanie said. He realized it was too powerful for anyone to own. A wise man, it seems. Of course, a truly wise man would have returned it to the place he found it. Failing that, somewhat similar. Skulduggery straightened. Of course! A smile popped on Osen's face. Have I helped you? You have. I know where it is. Thank you, Osen. Osen nodded proudly. I knew I could do this. I knew I could answer these questions and not talk too much. That's what I told him right before they cast it out. I said, listen, I can, and he vanished and the echo sound stopped glowing. Stephanie looked at Skulduggery. Well? Gordon followed the examples of the last of the ancients and buried the scepter deep within the earth. It's in the caves. What caves? Beneath Gordon's land is a network of caves and tunnels stretching for miles in each direction. It's a death trap, even the most powerful search word. Why? There are creatures in those caves that feed off magic. It would be the safest place to hide the scepter. I should have thought of it sooner. Beneath Gordon's house, a world of magic and wonder she never even knew was there. Bit by bit, she was seeing how close magic had been to her when she was growing up. If only she'd know where to look. That's such a strange sensation. But what had Skulduggery told her when they were about to enter the sanctuary? Better get used to that feeling. Skulduggery closed his hand over the puzzle box and the top slid over, hiding the echo stone once again. Maybe he'll send us more information. How long does it take to recharge a stone? About a year. Ah, well, okay then. That's probably a little too long. Still, who knows what else he could help people with. I'm sure it'd be valuable to know, folks who are interested in historians, like. Actually, we can't tell anyone we were here. You can tell Ghastly. I'm sure he'd forgive the little trespass if you told him what we found. Not really. See, this is his family's chamber. It's a sacred thing. Our being here is inexcusable. What? You said this is just like a storage shed. You didn't say anything about it being sacred. Now you know I have difficulty keeping friends. Skulduggery put the box back where she had found it. Stephanie was still staring at him. Is this disrespectful? She asked. Is this like dancing on someone's grave? A little worse than that. It's like digging up that grave, taking out the body, rifling through his pockets, and then dancing on the whole thing. It's a little more than disrespectful. Then yes, I can see why you have difficulty keeping friends. Skulduggery waved his hand out, and every candle in the chamber flickered. They were plunged into darkness, and Stephanie opened the door and peered out. The corridor was long and silent and empty. They stepped out, and Skulduggery followed the door, closing behind them. They crept along the corridor, up the stone steps, and out the wood and iron door. They moved quickly to the gallery. The corners were the worst, as they were always expecting a vampire to round them just as they approached. They were nearing the main hall when Skulduggery held up his hand. Ahead of them, crouching in the middle of the corridor, was a vampire. Stephanie stopped breathing. Its back was to them, and so they moved backward, careful not to make a sound. They were just turning when Stephanie saw something out of the corner of her eye. She clutched Skulduggery's arm. The other vampire was approaching from the opposite direction. They sank behind a marble pillar. Trapped across from them was an archway leading into another section of the building. But Stephanie was pretty sure that even if they made it through without being seen, they'd be cut off. Their only way out was back in the main hall with the harness, but their chances of making it without being torn to pieces were getting slimmer every moment. Skulduggery had his powers and he had his gun, but she knew he didn't even have a hope that he'd be able to fend off one of those creatures, let alone two. He turned to her, hand raised, one finger pointed at her and then pointing at the ground. Stay. The same finger pointing at himself and then pointing at the arch. Go. Stephanie's eyes widened and she shook her head, but now that finger was at his mouth and she pressed it against his teeth. If he had lips, she'd know the finger would be on them. She didn't want to agree to this. She didn't want to, but she knew she had no choice. He took out his gun from his jacket and pressed it up to her, giving her a nod, then immediately sprang up and lunged for the arch. The vampire approaching from behind saw him and broke into a run, and the vampire up ahead turned and sprang off its haunches. And Stephanie shrank back as it passed the pillar and took off through the archway, joining the hunt for the intruder. The gun was surprisingly heavy in her hand, and Stephanie crept out and started running for the main hall. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the dark corridors, but she didn't care. The only thing going through her mind was the fact that she needed to get out. She took each corner quickly, knowing the threat was behind her, and every time she took a corner, she let herself glance back. Empty corridor. Nothing coming for her. Not yet. She was approaching the main hall. Just a few more turns and she'd be there. She took the gun into her coat, and she needed both hands to strap herself into the harness. She turned the next corner and skidded to a stop. No, this couldn't be right. She looked up at the blank wall, her eyes wide. She couldn't be right. That couldn't be right. This wall shouldn't have been there. She took a wrong turn. She'd taken a wrong turn in this stupid gallery. Now she didn't know where she was. She was lost. She turned away from the dead end, wanting to scream at herself in frustration. She hurried back the way she'd come, glancing through every arch and doorway and past, looking for something she recognized. Everything looked like the same in the gloom. Why weren't there any signs? Where were the signs? There was an intersecting corridor up ahead. Could that be it? She tried remembering their trail from the hall to the iron door and mentally reversing it. Had they turned in an intersecting corridor? She cursed herself for not paying attention, cursed herself for relying on Skulduggery to lead the way. They must have come from there. Every turn behind her seemed to lead to a dead end, so they must have come from there. She was 10 paces from the intersecting corridor when the vampire emerged from a small hall up ahead. It saw her instantly. She didn't even have time to duck down. The corridor was 10 paces away, and the vampire was about 30 paces beyond that. She couldn't go back. If she went back, she'd be cut off. She had to go forward. She didn't have a choice. She bolted. The vampire kicked off and bounded towards her. It was going to cover the 30 paces faster than she would cover the 10. They ran straight at each other, and the vampire leaped. Stephanie dropped and slid beneath it, feeling the rushing air as it passed overhead. She came out of the slide on her feet and twisted her body and sprinted down the intersecting corridor. This was it. She recognized the statue. Only a few more turns. She heard the vampire behind her. Every corridor she turned cost her precious moments, but the vampire just leaped to the outer wall and sprang diagonally into the wall beyond the corridor. It was closing the distance between them. Stephanie burst through the doors to the main hall, and Skulduggery was there, launching himself at the vampire as it reached for her. They crashed backward and tumbled. "Get out of here!" Skulduggery shouted, kicking at the vampire away and scrambling to his feet. Stephanie grabbed the harness and hit the control button. Her arms were almost jerked out of their sockets as the harness withdrew. She rose to the skylight too fast, and when the harness hit the top, she lost her grip. She managed to get one hand around the edge of the skylight as her body swung wildly. Her other hand found a grip, and she gritted her teeth and pulled herself up. Her head and shoulders emerged from in the night air, and she climbed up the rest of the way to tumble onto the roof. Fighting to catch her breath, she immediately went back to the skylight and looked down just in time to see the vampire leap. She cried out and fell backwards as the vampire burst through the closed section of the skylight, showering her with glass. It hit the roof in a crouch, and Stephanie didn't even have time to get to her feet before it dived at her. She turned away, and its claws raked across her coat, but didn't penetrate the material. Although the impact slammed her to the roof again, the vampire overshot, but spun as soon as it landed, snarling. Its fangs dripped with saliva, and its eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, neither of them made a move. Then Stephanie slowly got to her hands and knees. The vampire hissed, but she didn't break eye contact. The vampire got to her feet beneath her, and now she was hunkering. The vampire was waiting for her to make a sudden move. The gun was in her pocket, but she didn't go for it. She moved slowly and kept her eyes open. Didn't blink, didn't do anything that might give it an excuse to resume its attack. Her knees straightened, though she stayed bent over. She took her first step to her left. The vampire moved with her. Its eyes blazed with sheer animal ferocity. All it wanted was to rip her apart. All it wanted was to keep her complete and utter annihilation. She forced herself to keep calm. "Easy, boy," she said softly, and the vampire snapped at the air. Its claws clicked against themselves. Even though they hadn't pierced her coat, her back was throbbing in pain. She knew that it hadn't been for whatever material the coat was made from, that single swipe would have killed her. The vampire began moving towards her. The moment Stephanie started to back away, the vampire's hackles raised. She froze. It leaped from the distance. It would be on her before she knew what was happening. It kept going, slowly stalking its prey. The second skylight exploded, and then everything was happening too fast. The vampire broke its eye lock and lunged, and Stephanie was already moving. Twisting to the side as the claws lacerated the space where she had just been. The other vampire was on the roof and closing in, and Stephanie sprinted for the edge of the building and jumped. Her legs hit branches, and she flipped over and was crashing headlong into a tree and falling. She smacked from one branch to the next, each impact spinning her and making her cry out. She hit a branch with her ribs, and the breath rushed out of her, and still she was falling. Then the impacts went away, and for a moment she was just her and the sound of rushing air, and then the ground slammed into her from behind. Stephanie lay on the grass, trying to breathe. She could see the tree, she could see the gallery, and she could see the sky. Something was falling towards her. Two figures dropping from the edge of the building. The vampires hit the ground and came at her. The window to her left shattered, and the security alarm pierced the night. Skulduggery landed in front of her and thrust his hand out in the air, shimmering, and caught one of the vampires, sending it hurtling back. The second one kept coming at Skulduggery and threw fire at it. But it leaped and cleared the flame and landed with both feet on Skulduggery's chest. They went down, and Stephanie's body started obeying her again. She got up, struggling to breathe, and the vampire swiped at Skulduggery's shirt, parted, and he cried out in pain. Stephanie wrapped both arms around the vampire's neck and pulled back. It hissed and flailed, and then she stumbled back to avoid its claws. Skulduggery sat up and pressed his hand against the vampire. The vampire shot backward as if it had been fired from a cannon. It hit the wall of the building with a sickening thwack and fell to the ground, and didn't get up. Stephanie grabbed Skulduggery's arm and dragged him to his feet, and they ran for the car.